add that one of the things that is most impressive to me about the leadership in this state of African Americans is this alliance with Native Americans and Latinos and whites, because you cannot fight for the civil rights of anybody unless you fight for the civil rights of everybody. We are in the first part of the 21st century. We have just began the second decade. And just as throughout Black History Month, we will recount what happened in the 19th century and the 20th century of America and American history. They will record what we do and what we do not do in the first decades of the 21st century. This is a particularly interesting part, though, because Representative Stapleton, unlike any group in the history of this country, we have to deal with something that there's no model to study. This is the first time in American history that those of us in civil rights and those of us in labor have to confront an African American head of state, where at the same time that we hold him accountable, we not undermine him. Nothing I can study prepares us for that, because no generation had to do this. So what we are doing now is writing history. What the young people that have been brought to these chambers today must understand, it is not enough to just study your history, but be prepared to make some history. It is great to know what we have done, but only if it will prepare you for what you will do. To know that we were in the beginnings of this world that we know, that we were original scientists, we were original architects, we were original historians, we were original mathematicians, is good. What is not good is if you recognize that and then dumb yourself down and not do the best you can. One of the things that we've engaged in National Action Network around the last 2 years in this country is education. We cannot continue to ignore that this country has gone backwards in education. We cannot settle on the fact that many nations with less resources have higher levels of reading and mathematics than we have. There's no excuse for our trying to write off the ability of our children being able to learn. Any nation is judged by how it educates its children and handles its seniors. And in the name of anything, to sacrifice that is to sacrifice the greatness of the country. I remember when President Obama went into office, he held a meeting in the Oval Office within the first 120 days about education as a civil right. And in the meeting, Education Secretary Duncan was there, Valerie Jarrett, his senior advisor. And seated on the couch before him was Newt Gingrich, the former House Speaker, and myself. That in itself was an achievement for the president. But he decided to venture even further. He challenged former Speaker Gingrich and I to tour 5 cities with Secretary Duncan to study education. And we did. And most of you know that Mr. Gingrich and I don't agree on much of anything. We don't agree today is Friday. But both of us agree that we must deal with the education crisis in this country. We cannot sacrifice public education and the right and need for every child to learn. If there is a civil rights issue today, and if there is a bias today, I would say that the racism of the 21st century is low expectations, where we have designated large groups of our children as throwaways, can't learn and can't be something. I say to the young people today, don't let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. To fit people into convenient social boxes is not the way we made history. And not the way we made achievements. I tell people all the time, I didn't even know I was underprivileged until I got to college. I went to Brooklyn College. I was studying sociology. Joe Johnson, professor, said, we're going to study the underprivileged. He says, all right with me. He said, we're going to study people that live in housing developments, on welfare, single-parent homes. I said, you talk about me? The reason I didn't know I was underprivileged is my single-parent welfare mother didn't raise me as to what I wasn't. She raised me. And my pastor raised me that I was expected to be something. And I was expected to achieve something. And we must stop telling these young people that they are not expected to achieve. You are not responsible for the life you were born into. You didn't choose your parent. You didn't choose your environment. You didn't choose your economic and social status. But you can choose what you do once you're born here. So we must remove that. And we must say all children can learn. And we must do with all we can to make that possible. We must also appeal to the young people that they cannot be seduced by the culture. When I was growing up, and many of you were growing up, the culture told us to be something. Now the culture is telling these kids their role models and definition of success are criminals and drug dealers and making children they won't raise, and living lewd lives. And in many ways, I have two daughters in their early 20s. In many ways, we have had this misinterpretation that thug life and street life is somehow our culture. That is not our culture. Black history has never been Black history has never been about how low we could go. Black history has always been about, no matter how far down we were, we found a way to get out. That is why it's important. We have things like the Arts Cultural Center in Albuquerque. That's why it's important that you have programs around this state that you need to continue to have. Because we need to give the positive examples to these young people to see what they can be. It is good for the country, it is good for the state. Young people tell me all the time, well, you don't understand, Reverend Al, it's rough, it's not our fault. It's stacked against us, and nobody fights that more than I do. But you cannot accept unfairness, and you cannot concede to being down. If I stepped from behind this rostrum and walked over to your seat and knocked you off your chair, that's on me. But if we come back next Friday and you still laying on the floor, that's on you. What I mean by that, even if you're not responsible for being down, you're responsible for getting up. Challenges today that we must face head on. There needs to be a real discussion on how we deal in these times. Lee Saunders and I are on tour to appeal to people all over this country that in the midst of this economic tough time, in the midst of the downturn where the economy faced the worst crisis since the Depression, let us have a real conversation about how we come through and recover. We cannot blame those that were the victims for the economic conditions that we had. There was recently a commission done on what caused the economic downturn. And they came back and said it was recklessness in terms of greed among some of the private sector and the Wall Street crowd. There was not enough of those that were to regulate in Washington that were on the switch. That was the cause of the economic downturn. That was the cause that almost brought us into a depression, and in many of our communities it did. But now we're hearing to pay for it. We want to penalize those who never did anything to cause it. We want to freeze workers. Lay off teachers, lay off sanitation workers, lay off firemen, lay off police. They're not the ones that caused the problem. We want to invade and change and do things to the average working class person who sits frightened now. Yeah. Look at the winter that we've gone through. On top of the cost that we couldn't afford, you add that now energy bills going up. And you have some segments of the country like New Mexico where people will have to absorb even higher costs while their jobs are being threatened. Well, don't subsidize the rich that took advantage of the economy. That make the cities run, to demonize those that work every day, trying to put their children through school and trying to hold on to something dear in life when they did nothing. While we see those on Wall Street that did have recovered. The Dow Jones been over 12,000 for a week, while we're talking about laying off state and city workers and freezing jobs and changing pension plans, knowing good well that nothing you do to the pension plan would add one dime to the deficit in the state. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in Memphis supporting a strike of sanitation workers, members of ASME, the union that Lee Saunders helps to lead. You cannot celebrate King without dealing with Kingism. We love to quote his speech, I Have a Dream, but read the whole speech. Don't read the end of the speech. Read the entire speech where he talked about workers. In fact, It was A. Philip Randolph who called that march. It was a labor march with Walter Reuther. And he talked about a strong national government. He talked about we cannot have states where governors' lips drip with the words of interposition and nullification. Well, you cannot come in Dr. King's name and talk about weak national government. You can't come in Dr. King's name and nullify federal immigration laws and act as though that we can deal with the problem of immigration with racial profiling, and that we deal with based on who people look like or their surname, they become suspects rather than the American citizens that many of them are. That is not the American way. And we can't do it to our workers. I told the young people yesterday at the college that when many hear us complain, they say to us, why are you complaining? Because you are talking about our income, our livelihood. You're not talking about cutting back on one vacation home. You're talking about the primary only home they have. I said it's like a discussion I once observed between a pig and a chicken. The chicken and the pig were arguing about a bacon and egg sandwich. The chicken was cool. The chicken was laid back. The chicken was reading the budget report. But the pig was screaming and squealing and raising his voice. And someone said, why is the chicken so reserved and the pig so out of control? I said, because when you look at that sandwich, the chicken dropped an egg, the pig lost a leg. The fight to make America equal is still before us. Today, as we gather, we still have inequality in economics in this country, in bank loans, in mortgages. Blacks are still doubly unemployed. Native Americans, Latinos, high unemployment, the education gap. We have gone to where we must deal with the institutional inequality. But yesterday teaches us if we can go from where we were to where we are now, we can finish the journey. Amen. Let's not celebrate because we almost are there. Let's finish the journey and make America fair and equal to everyone. Until every child that is born today has the same opportunity and the same equal protection under the law, then we're not there yet. As long as we know that a white child and a black child and a Latino child and an Asian child and a Native American child will live probably different lives, then we're not there yet. So it is not enough to talk about how far we've come, because that was done by generations before us. We must face the challenge of this generation. Yes. We must we must face the hard decisions you make. And when you're in this chamber every day, you should not look for what is popular. People don't make history by paying for what is popular. They make and change history by standing up for what's right. Because people stood up for what's right. Blacks came from the back of the bus and got the right to vote. Women got the right to vote. We made progress across the board only because people were willing to stand for something. And in life, you will be judged not by how many people patted you on the back, but ultimately ultimately you will be judged by what you stood for. I can tell you, as a preacher, as Representative Staples has recounted, I've been preaching all my life, and many ministers are here with us today. They can tell you the hardest job of a minister is to preach the funeral of an irrelevant person. That's a hard job. They roll the body down the aisle, stretch it out in front of the altar, family sitting on the front row crying, and we're supposed to get up and hallucinate a life. Most folks shouldn't even have a funeral. Most folks should go straight from the morgue to the cemetery. Because most folks never did anything we can talk about. You should think about every day that you get up. That if by chance or fate or God, this is my last day, what can they say about me? What did I stand for? What difference did I make? And if you are not happy with your own assessment, you need to go to work today to make your and we must continue this fight. My message to you for Black history, let's make history. Amen. Amen. Let's continue the legacy of struggle. And let's remember we didn't get here by ourselves. People fought, some died, some went to jails. So we could even be in these chambers. We owe it to them to finish the fight and to make America what it should be. As Lee and Saunders and I have been traveling, lady said to me this morning, said, well, I understand their new challenges, but y'all sound like people did back in the old civil rights labor days. And I told her, I said, let me tell you a story Martin Luther King III told me. She said, what is that? I said, there was an essay contest where a teacher at the end of the semester said that the essay to conclude the term that year was she wanted all of the students to go home over the weekend and write an essay on their family pet. All of them went home. There was one young student who got A's and A pluses all through the semester. But he decided he really wanted to sit down and concentrate on his essay. And he worked on it, poetic language, checked his grammar, every punctuation right. And he came in and handed in his paper with his classmates that Monday. Wednesday came, and the teacher came in and handed out all of the papers. And as all the students got their grades, some A's, some B's, some C's, this student, best student in the class, was stunned that when he got his grade, he had a big F on the paper. He was stunned. He was absolutely speechless. But he decided to wait until class was over and asked the teacher, what was this all about? And when all the other students had left, he went up to the desk and he said to the teacher, teacher, you failed me. I never failed. I got nothing lower than an A, never even an A minus. And I worked on this essay harder than anything this year. Every punctuation mark there, grammar right. I used poetic phrases that I studied. She said, oh no, you did an excellent job. You did a great job. It flowed beautifully. She said, you just had one problem. You forget that I've been teaching here for 26 years. And I had your brother 3 years ago. And I read his essay and it almost read the same as yours. He said, oh, I understand the problem now. He kind of exhaled and smiled. And she said, what are you smiling about? He said, because you misunderstand. I'm not a plagiarist. I didn't copy my brother's essay. Me and my brother had the same dog. And the reason we read alike is we're describing the same thing. The reason why the song lead and I sound like labor leaders and civil rights leaders of the past is we're facing the same situation.
Amen.
People that want to put the rich over the working class, states' rights over the federal government, scapegoating over real, responsible, hard decisions. We're not trying to sound like Dr. King, but we're facing the same situation, and it's time for us to get that. Let me end by saying this. They say to me, Reverend, you must be patriotic, and we are. In fact, we're the real patriots. I don't understand patriots that love America, but don't love Americans. How can you love America and lay off American workers? How can you love America and cut education budget to American children? How can you love America and profile Latino American citizens? You can't love America without loving the American people. Real patriots. In fact, the history of blacks in America is that we were been the real patriots, and we come second to none. We stand with any patriot. We fought for the country when the country didn't fight for us. We went and fought wars when we had to come back. And some of the enemies of the country could eat in restaurants we couldn't eat in. And sleep in hotels we couldn't sleep in. But we still stood for the country. Nobody needs to lecture us. We held the flag up even when we were denied equal rights. We always loved America. We always loved America. Because I believe that if we would be strong, we can finish the journey. I believe in America. Why? Because I looked and saw when I was a little boy, I saw how two black students, one male and one female, were trying to go to college in my mother's home state of Alabama. And the governor stood in the door and blocked them. The young lady had a little sister who was traumatized to watch her sister blocked on TV. They had to send National Guard in to bring her sister to college. There were threats, death threats, bomb threats. Traumatized this young girl. This young girl would hide in a room for months. Traumatized at what her family was going through because her sister just wanted to go to college. But I lived long enough to last year I was in Selma, Alabama, and saw the daughter of that governor shake hands with that sister's husband, the first black attorney general of the United States, Eric Holder, who married that little girl's sister. I believe in America because I've seen a young man from a single parent home who had to eat sometimes on food stamps, only saw his father a month in his life, put his hand on Abe Lincoln's Bible, and become the president of the United States of America. The question is whether all of us do. And if we do, we'll make America what America should be. I remember Lee Saunders' 9/11/01, when the most vicious, despicable act of terrorism ever hit these shores, hit New York. I was in New York that day. And I remember the trauma and the fear and anxiety we had. A couple of days later, I went to a radio station. And we were all trying to gather thoughts to give people comfort and reassurance. And I remember when I got to that station that morning, before I went on, they were playing patriotic songs. and they were playing America the Beautiful. But the rendition they were playing that morning was done by Ray Charles. Because nobody quite sung that song like Ray Charles did. And I sat in that studio and listened to Ray singing, "Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for ample ways of grain, purple mountains, majesty above the fruited plain." And it occurred to me that Ray was blind. He'd never seen any purple mountains. He'd never seen no fruited plain. But there was a faith in Ray that he would sing about what he couldn't see, but what he believed was there. And that was the faith that made our grandparents march in the South. That was the faith that made labor stand with Martin Luther King. We stood for an America we couldn't see, but that we believed that it would become that one day.